particularly excited about the topic for today. It's been many, many years of talking about health at work and lots of pie in the sky ideas, but organisations are finally paying real interest in making it happen and really caring about it. I personally think it's such a massive impact on our local economy. If we don't pay attention to our health, we all pay the price for it. And corporate sustainability and responsibility, I think, can go a long way to ensure that people are given the best opportunity possible to be healthy as human beings. And included in that, I think, is mental health. Not that we necessarily have to discuss that today, but I'm very privileged to have two very special people here today. We've got Deborah Villa, and I'll have to quote this. Deborah has written a book called Urban Woman Syndrome, Eat, Move, Think Your Way to Ultimate Health. So Deborah is also the MD of Complete Corporate Wellness, and we'll be talking through the programs that she provides to corporates. Please make this an interactive session, so if there's something that we're discussing as a topic, please do put your hand up and you can have an opportunity to ask a question rather than leaving it to the end. You might forget what you wanted to ask, or it might inspire a following discussion or question you have. Then we have Jack Noonan here. He is from Well, which I'll leave Jack to explain all the technical differences, but Jack was also involved in, let me just get this right, in creating the climate change programs in Victoria. So Jack's working from the other end and looking at buildings. So please no questions are off the table. We're here to inform you with whatever it is that you would like to find out today. And it's the real questions and the how you make it really work, which is important. So I might hand over to Deborah to introduce herself and Jack thereafter.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming, and it's so important, like Annalise said, that the topic of corporate wellness. The reason why is because we know we spend a lot of time at work, so that's how I became interested. I'm a practitioner and I saw how work influenced my clients' health and well-being. So I thought, well, I would be invited to speak in workplaces. Then we started providing services, and then all of a sudden a national company was born, Complete Corporate Wellness. So we provide services to corporate Australia of everything that you can think about health and well-being, and we have a unique approach that maybe we can chat some time about it. So that's how I came about doing that and creating Complete Corporate Wellness. So, to you, Josh.
Thanks, Deborah. Good start. Thanks, Deborah. So my name's Jack Noonan. I lead the International Well Building Institute across Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand? I think there's something wrong with this battery. I'll use that. Sorry. My name's Jack Noonan. I lead the International Well Building Institute across Australia and New Zealand, which is a movement that has really captured the imagination of workplaces and of buildings over the last 5 years. People often ask me why. So the average Australian will live to 82 years. 72 years of those 82 years will be spent indoors. About 4.5 years will be spent in transit, and less than 5 years will be spent outdoors. Thinking about workplaces, you will spend 90,000 hours of your life at work. Pretty depressing. So that's the bad stuff. I actually come from a building science background. I'm really passionate about buildings. I'm really passionate about interiors. I've spent the last kind of 3 or 5 years working on climate change programs for Sustainability Victoria, which is a state government agency in Victoria. But when Well came onto the scene, I really thought, from a building science perspective, this was something new. This was something that would bring my passion for science and my passion for human performance, my passion for sustainability together. Well was launched back in 2015. It was the first time that we've brought together medical professionals, architects and building practitioners together in the same room to create the Well Building Standard. It is a standard that's performance verified, so we physically go into spaces and we test water, we test air, we look at your HR policies, we look at the lighting, we look at the acoustics. It's performance verified, it's not just about design. And that's one thing that really has been the success of Well in the last couple of years. Typically we've just focused on design of our spaces, but now we're shifting the conversation from design to performance. It's captured the imagination of the world. We've got about, I think it's close to 1,600 projects across the world. We've got 97 different projects across Australia. Australia is the 4th largest market in the world behind China, the US and the UK. And what it's really attempting to do is look at public health interventions within our buildings and with our workplaces. So yeah, that's Well.
I had wondered if you could summarise for us, Deborah, if there were 3 things that an organisation could attempt to change from creating a healthier workspace, what would you say are short wins, a great return on investment, and not necessarily as challenging it was as most people may assume it to be?
That's a bit of a tricky question because everyone that we encounter want a real return on investment on their corporate health and well-being. It's not as easy as just getting a massage therapist to come in, unfortunately, and give some massages. If it was that easy, then everyone would have a great workplace culture and great return on investment. So there's really key elements to a great corporate health and wellness, and some of you might already have it. And if you do have it, usually you have a workplace that has a great workplace culture because they go hand in hand. So a workplace culture that has a great workplace wellness program usually gets a great return on investment. So the key elements that you need, for example, for a workplace wellness to work and get you that ROI that everyone wants, is that first of all, it has to have leadership buy-in. So your leaders must be on board, must be the one that are driving. If you're the leader, if you're HR, if you're CEOs or the managers, you must be the one promoting it. Secondly is making sure that your program's holistic. So our philosophy is eat, move, think. So meaning eat is nutrition, movement, mindset's very important, and learning. So that's making sure it's important. Another thing that has been proven is to have one provider providing all your services. The reason why is because you need data to be able to measure pre and data to measure post in all your services to be able to have a real return on investment. And of course, making sure that you have what we call wellness champion inside, either the leader or someone that is promoting it, driving that, that engagement. With all that, then you have those real ROI factors that are, increased participation rates, great performance, productivity, all these things that leaders want to see and want to really capture to be able to have that return on investment. So I know there's not really 3 things, but it's very hard to qualify to have this and this to be able to have it. But having a holistic program is important, leadership buying, I would say, and having measurable data is the 3 things, yeah.
Thank you. And Jack, a question to you. Many people here would be unsure as to how much of an improvement they can make in the building and what impact it really has. The question to you is, I've been on your website, looked at what you can achieve. Do you want to pull highlights out of what is easy achievements to improve the actual quality of the environment?
One very simple thing. You can't improve what you're not measuring. So measurement and understanding where you're currently at is incredibly important. That just doesn't include, some of the hard stuff associated with buildings, and when I say hard, I mean like tangible stuff. It also includes some of the softer things, like your HR policies, like what you're doing with your staff around mental health. That's really important. What we're finding is that projects that are going through the process of WELL certification are engaging their entire entire workforce. So it's a public health intervention that a lot of their occupants actually don't know that they're participating in. So we often talk about participation rates. When you're in a well building, you're participating in a wellness program because of the amenity that's being provided to you. The other thing that I would say is that we're seeing a shift in focus. So to Deborah's point about mindset, the whole idea of the fact that our buildings and our workplaces can affect our health, it's not a new concept. We've been talking about the concept of sick building syndrome for 40 or 50 years, but the mindset shifted. So it shifted from how our buildings are causing us harm through asbestos, through hazardous materials, through poor lighting, through poor ventilation rates. But if we're going to be spending 90% of our time indoors, why are we focusing on doing less harm? Why aren't we focused on doing more good? So that's been the real shift in focus. So I think one of the things that we're finding is that by actually investing in people, investing in HR policies, investing in and actually speaking to your occupants in terms of what they want from their spaces, you're actually finding that we're getting huge returns of investment. Generally, some fit-outs are paid for in less than 3 months. Often when we think about a new project, we're talking about the construction costs, the design costs, the costs associated with engaging consultants. We need to move away from that thinking. We need to think about 90% of the costs of your business are the people. And if you're investing in your people and you look at the return of investment from improved performance, improved satisfaction, attraction and retention of staff, that's where you're starting to get really, really strong benefits in terms of dollars and cents from a new fit out.
Thank you, Jack. I couldn't agree more. From a physical space point of view, Deborah, is there anything that you could particularly pull out as standouts that you would recommend someone in the audience may consider implementing in their workspace?
A lot of the issues that we encounter is that we don't have a budget for wellness, right? We don't have a budget. That's the key thing. So there's a few things that you can do, but the problem with no budget means that we haven't communicated to our leaders their importance, like Jack was saying. What is it that they're going to get in return? Well, they're going to get a lot of things in return. If you think about 94% of people now, the data of 2018, are at risk of a chronic lifestyle disease. That's 97% of us. That's probably all of us. And then 50% are actually coming to work with a chronic lifestyle disorder. That is the number one cause of death in Australia. So if you think about how not well we are at the moment and what a wellness program will do, or your policies will do, will just pay itself. If you think about how much, for example, absenteeism costs, now the data is 44 billion it costs Australian companies a year, just absenteeism. So in terms of budget, so this is why I sort of rant on about the budget. You don't need a budget to be able to implement, physical things. For example, if we're talking about walk meetings, we're talking about making sure that you get outside, making sure that you create a walk club within your workspace. Make sure that you don't have junk or not allow junk in your kitchen. Making sure that you're walking around every 15 minutes. There's little things that you can implement at work that is able to create a big change in your workforce. Another thing is a supportive environment. That's a big thing. Being able to allow people to come and chat to you if they have an issue about their health or they're not feeling well. That is very important. So little things that we're talking about changing physical, but also it's the policy and how we create that environment for people to come and approach you to be able to create change and then create a real difference in your workplace.
So I think Deborah's point around chronic diseases is really important. 1/3 of chronic diseases across Australia are preventable. And yet 97% of Australians will have a chronic disease in their life. Can anybody guess how much of health spending goes to prevention of chronic diseases? 1.5%. 1.5% of health spending goes to the prevention of chronic diseases. Yet 97% of us will have a chronic disease, and a third of those are preventable. What we're trying to say is that the buildings that we build, the buildings that we operate, the buildings that we stay in, the workplaces that we work in, pardon me, if you're participating in the design, operations, everyone in this room, we are all agents for public health. We just probably haven't thought of ourselves as agents for public health, but we are all agents for public health whether we like it or not, because we're actually implementing things that prevent chronic diseases. And the way that we design our spaces has a real impact on health. That's one thing that I wanted to say. Second thing I wanted to say was about physical inactivity. How often do you go into a building and you see the elevator first? Some buildings, modern buildings, you go in and you see an amazing staircase. We need to make it easier for people. We need to make it attractive for people to take the stairs. Physical inactivity is a massive problem across Australia, but it's also a design problem. If you want to take the stairs in a commercial office building, you have to go behind the lifts and you have to take a really dingy fire staircase up to your office. Who wants to do that? It's a safety issue as well. Who wants to take the stairs in after they finish work? If it's a nice, inviting space, that's how people use it.
It's working. I would add to that, as a designer, it's very frustrating going into buildings and the fire stairs are deemed only for emergency egress. So there are very few buildings that will allow you to go up and down and swipe in and out, which I think if we collectively put enough pressure on building owners and building management is just a different shift in thinking as far as that's concerned. And I just want to throw a thought out there. We've come from a world of very formal engagement in the past in business. Things are changing and people are taking a more collaborative, more interactive approach to how they deal not only amongst one another, but also with their clients. I think in the past it was a fad to think, I'm going to go sit on the cycling station and cycle away while I'm reading something. And it was almost laughable to think, we've got a gimmick in the office. However, if you really think about it, you don't really have to think about cycling. It's just a motion that you're going to do automatically. And as long as you don't cycle until you're out of breath, you could quite easily just read a white paper. If you had an hour or two that you needed to do some research, you could do it at the cycle station. So for me, it's also a mind shift in how people accept that they can do things differently. Walking meetings are a brilliant idea. So my question to you, Deborah, is are there any other fads out there that are pie in the sky crazy thoughts now that you see coming into workplaces as being more normal?
Yes, there are. Talking about, I went to a conference in the States, and what companies were doing to promote walking was putting artwork in their emergency stairs. So putting artwork, putting pictures, putting funny quotes. So people would go and say, I've put a funny quote. Go have a look, and they would draw on the wall, and people would take the stairs. So small things like that make a big difference in terms of not only. You were saying fads, but not only in terms of what kind of programs, but also fun, talking about engagement, talking about participating with your workmates. So we're staying away from, even though we still do it, the biometric testing, which is all the glucose, cholesterol and all that stuff, because that's not really showing you anything about showing you that you're unhealthy. It's not giving you any tools. So we're moving away from that and doing things that really are fun and engaging, like challenges, like getting, groups and teams involved, like treatment days to actually make a difference to your health instead of just testing and saying, yes, we have chronic disease here in our workplace. and that's it. So before we were all about numbers. So the fad, well, I wouldn't say fads. I think it's going to a good way. So fads, I think that was a fad before, to say, yes, I've ticked a box. I've screened all my staff. Yes, 10% have the risk of diabetes, 20%, and then off we went. So we encourage our clients that if they want that, well, we can do it, but we're not happy about it, and we're going to keep badgering them to add other things to it. Sometimes we even say no. We even say no if that's the only thing that they want, because it really provides no value. So if that's all they want, we sort of say you're better off going to another company, because it is no value whatsoever. It is of value if you're measuring data, which is great. It's a good baseline, but not as a service. So I think that I know I'm not talking about trends or fads, but I'm talking about what we're moving away from. We're moving away from things like that, and we're moving towards mindfulness, meditation. We're moving away from being able to speak about mental health. We know that now 65% of us will suffer some form of mental illness in our life. They say about 1 in 4 people have some kind of mental health disorder, and 1 in 4 have musculoskeletal. But if I asked all of you who has back problems, everyone will put their hand up. But if I say who suffers from a mental health disorder, no one will put their hand up. So the stigma is still there, even though we are breaking down barriers with Are You OK Day and mindfulness and meditation. There's still the stigma is there. We've got to break that down. So I would say that that's what we're going towards. In terms of fads and all that, I think that there isn't one that is. We're going quite in a good direction here in Australia. I think we're moving away to things that don't work, things that do work and give a good return on investment, but not only on the health of the individual, but the health of the company as a whole, because we've got to think about that creating that healthy company and not a toxic company will actually increase the bottom line as well. So by having those team interactions, having those fun events, fun health events that will promote that sort of team bonding will help the bottom line as well. Yeah.
You've just touched on something I wanted to know, and I'll hand over to you. You can also answer, Jack. How does Australia compare to the rest of the world as far as wellness at work is concerned?
In terms of the amount of companies, so in the States, for example, 64% of companies over 50 employees or more have a health and wellness program. Here is about 47% of total. We don't have a real number as far as I know. I don't know if you, Jack, know of companies, how many employees they have. So we're a little bit behind in the uptake of health and wellness in the workplace. However, in saying that, we're quite ahead in the programs that we are providing. We're always looking, our company's always looking to the States because they are a little bit ahead of us in that sense, but we are doing very similar things here. So, we're quite in a good level in that sense. Yeah.
From a building perspective, I would argue that Australia to some degree leads the world in terms of healthy building design. There are certainly elements of the way that we design our buildings that definitely need improvement. From an air quality perspective, I think the stuff that we're doing with materials is a little bit behind the US and Europe in terms of the materials that we're putting into our spaces. But having said that, I have folks, so we're headquartered in the US, in New York, and I have folks come over to check out some well projects here in Australia, and they are absolutely blown away by our end-of-trip facilities. Now, end-of-trip facilities in the US, I don't know if any of you have seen end-of-trip facilities in the US. It is a cupboard that is shared by about 100 employees. You're lucky if you get a shower. Why would anybody want to ride to work? Why would anybody want to run to work? We're really lucky in that our large developers, our large workplaces have really, let's be honest, given up real estate. They've given up real estate for the benefit of tenants to commit to end-of-trip facilities. So we're really lucky in that sense. I just wanted to capture something that was asked just a little bit earlier on around trends. So I really see, or fads as it was put, I really see 3 key trends in workplaces at the moment. The first is circadian lighting. So what we mean by that is lighting's changed over time. Workplaces of 20 years ago, you would go in and you'd have bright fluorescent lighting. That's no longer the case. Our eyes aren't just for seeing, they actually act as environmental cues. So sleep deprivation is a massive problem in Australia. And circadian lighting has been proved to have an impact on reducing sleep deprivation. So if you go into an office space, what you want to see is you want to have lighting that mimics daylight during the middle of the day. As you get towards the afternoon, you want lighting that starts to get warmer and gets you ready for finishing work. And when you get home, you want warm light that gets you ready for bed. Unfortunately, the way that we've designed our lighting in Australia over the last 50, 60, 70 years is that we have a single temperature lighting across the entire day. And we wonder why we can't get to sleep at night. And people in high performance environments are staying at work until 9, 10 o'clock at night sometimes under really, really bright lighting, and they wonder why they can't go to sleep at night. That's the first trend. Second trend is around substance abuse education. So once again, a little bit of more of a fluffy one. Substance abuse is a huge issue across Australia. Not just alcohol abuse, tobacco abuse, drug use as well. People's reliance on pain medication is something that is starting to come through in the workplace. Providing education to employees around substance abuse is a key trend that's currently taking place across Australia. And the third one, I would have to say, is around mental health of managers. So it's all well and good to provide education to all staff and engage all staff around mental health. But if you're not providing some dedicated support in relation to mental health of managers so that they can actually walk the talk and be that inspiration for the rest of the staff, you're really missing an important point. So I'd say that there are three trends across Australian workplaces at the moment.
Can I add to that, if that's all right? That's a great point about the mental health. We actually now provide a mental first aid for leaders and HR. So it's actually a certificate, like everyone has a first aid. You know, we all probably, most of us have a first aid. This is a mental health first aid, which is very important. I see it as in the future to be mandatory, like you have to have a first aid. So it's very important to be able to recognise the signs, what to do, how to deal with it, because it's a very hard thing to be able to deal with. And if you've ever encountered it, it can be quite confronting for yourself. So you have to have the tools, your staff have to have the tools to be able to deal with that ever-increasing problem. In terms of lighting, of course, it mucks with our hormones. Cortisol levels are rising at different times that they shouldn't be, and sleep can be a very, very, very important factor to good health, from, increased weight to stress, anxiety, and so forth. So lighting is very important, and yeah. And like I said, sorry, I didn't want to put Australia down into that, said it's equal to America. Jack is right. We provide wellness classes in buildings for the tenants. So we actually provide, classes, health assessments, everything for these amazing buildings, amazing landlords that are giving a lot of money to be able to provide an experience of health at work. So definitely it's a trend that we don't see as much in the States that we are seeing here across the board in many, many buildings. So.
Then I was very curious to see whether there has been any shift in, the cookie jar at work approach, whether that's become the fruit platter or any alternatives. Are organisations really looking at nutrition and how they best support their employees from that front?
Absolutely. I think it's very important. We have a client that we work with. They have head chefs and they have an industrial kitchen, lucky people. And we work with him in terms of what they're serving, breakfast, lunch and dinner. They do still provide snacks that we don't approve of, but that's because they want to, cater for everyone. And that's okay. I always say that as long as people are educated and they are laid out in a way that they're right at the bottom, so people really need to bend down to get it and hidden, then we're okay. We always put the nice, bright, nice stuff at the top and then all the junk at the bottom. So we design it in a way that we can actually have people, steer away. But talks, education is very important because we are time poor. So our nutrition has been, not as great as we can because of that time pause. So we teach little hacks that you can do and replacements. But there are many companies now that are providing healthy snacks instead of the normal chips and chocolate.
So nourishment is one of the 10 key concepts of the Well Building Standard. Every well-certified project needs to consider the food that they're providing to their employees. What that means is that one of the basic requirements is that workplaces provide either 50% of food options are fresh fruit and vegetables, or that there's at least 2 options of fruit and 2 options of vegetables available to employees in the workplace. It's not about being Big Brother and saying you can't have this or you can't have that in the Well Building Standard. What it is it's about making the healthier choice the easier choice. So making sure that they have those options available. How often, certainly, back 10, 15 years ago when I was at university, you're studying late at night, the vending machine is the only thing that is available. You go to the vending machine and you don't have an option. There are no healthy options within that vending machine. One thing that we're seeing is the rise of healthy vending machines, which is really important. The other thing in terms of the way that we design our spaces, we have a feature within Well called mindful eating. It sounds really pie in the sky, pardon the pun. But what mindful eating is all about is providing spaces for people to come to eat together. We know that when people eat together, they eat healthier. If you're behind your desk and you don't have a space to go to at lunchtime because nobody's provided that space for you, you're going to eat, chances are that you're going to eat an unhealthier meal compared to if you had a space to go. So one requirement of Well is that there's space for at least 25% of employees to go to have lunch at any one time, which, once again, it's an investment in real estate, right? Like, you could cram more people into your space. This is a beautiful kitchen space here. It could be used as workstations, but the team have obviously deemed it important to have people collaborate and come together to eat, to speak, etc., etc.
Thank you. We have staff lunch together on Wednesday afternoons, just by the way. We all come together and eat together. So this is regularly used for precisely that, not always the healthiest food. But I just wanted to also touch on this concept of space and all these other soft themes that are floating around. I had a recount from a facilities management representative from a very large legal firm that said they used to have individual offices for every associate lawyer, and no one realized that they had one team member who would come in early in the morning into the office before anyone else was in the office, close the door, work the whole day, and go home when everyone else has gone home. It so happened that his wife, I think, had cancer or whatever, and his mental health deteriorated over time to a point where it became an immediate crisis. She now says, if he was still, because he's retired by now, they've now gone open offices, there would be no opportunity now for him to hide away and no one else to pick up that there is something pressing on a particular individual and affecting them badly. So don't ever forget the impact that your physical space can have on how things are monitored and perceived. And I know it's really difficult to marry those things around. People go, oh, how do you create spaces that reflect your values? It's such an esoteric thing to think about, but it is really, really important to consider. So I'd like to throw it open to the floor if anyone had any questions to the team.
Most of my clients are probably a little bit paralysed in how to use that.
It's yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, we've seen a shift, particularly in the last 10 years, from a focus on energy to a focus on what we like to call indoor environment quality, right? And in terms of collecting data and knowing what to do with data in relation to energy, it's really simple. You know the kilowatt hours that you're using, you know that you want to get it down, you want to get it off your energy bill and stuff like that. We're still a little bit immature in terms of how we treat indoor environment quality and how we treat healthy building qualities. But I think that's starting to change, and a lot of it's starting to change because, I mean, I don't know how many people have a Apple Watch or a Fitbit, but we're collecting a lot of the data and we're actually transforming that data into things that are easier to use. So one of the requirements of the Well Building Standard is that you're not just collecting air quality data, you're collecting that air quality data and you're actually digesting it and providing it as information to your occupants, so that when they walk into that space, they can see exactly what the temperature is in their space, what the carbon dioxide levels are in their space, what the other indoor pollutants are in their space. It's really about being transparent with that data, I think, and that's the first kind of step in terms of then identifying that you've got a problem. But to be perfectly honest, when you've identified that you've got a problem, it's already too late. You need to be actually transparent with the data that you collect. And I feel like we do that really well with energy, but we do that less well with healthy buildings features. I think that's starting to change though. We need to, I mean, facility managers are often, you know, they're in some pretty poor performing spaces within our buildings. It's quite ironic. They're responsible for providing comfort and providing amenity to all of us in these amazing buildings, and yet they're in the basement of buildings, you know, working away. We really need to equip facility managers to actually understand what this data means. One of the ways that we're going to equip them is to actually get them to start providing transparent data to the buildings and to the occupants.
On that note, before we have another question, I wondered whether AI has a role to play in digesting data and making recommendations on traffic flow within the building, or...
I think that's another really good question. So, somewhat controversial, I'm not a huge fan of open office spaces. When open office spaces do not give control to the occupant. So, when you go into an open office space and you're told you must sit there, you're going to see dissatisfaction levels associated with acoustic comfort, associated with thermal comfort, go down very, very quickly. If you actually provide the option to an employee to come in, and you know, we talk about activity-based working, hot desking, that kind of thing. Take away all of those types of terms. It's about individual control. It's about personal control. That's where artificial intelligence comes into play. Because if you want to utilize a space well, you actually need to understand where your employees are going, and you need to actually set up your spaces for that. So if you have 50% of your occupants, or say, for example, you have 80% of your occupants that really want that corner of the office, and they're all fighting for that, you have that data. We're collecting that data now. You need to actually work out what it is about that corner of the office is so appealing, and actually address other spaces of your office around that. It might be thermal comfort. It might simply be that everyone else around this space is so cold and they go there because it's nice and warm. That's an easy fix. It's a really easy fix. But we're just not really having that conversation. We've got the data. We've got the data, but we're just not having that conversation.
Any other questions? So Deborah, I wanted to ask, we're talking about data collection. How do you collect data from your wellness approach?
Yeah, Sure. The first thing that you want to collect is obviously the participation rate. No one wants to go into an event and find out that you only have 3 people turn up. So we have a really high participation rate. Industry is about 30 and we have about 89% of participation rate. And I was saying to Jack, in the buildings we have 100% and then people on waiting lists. The reason why I think is because it's larger numbers, obviously in a building, but in the workplace. And there's a few things that we do. I won't give out all my secrets away, but no, there's a few simple things that we do is in terms of software, in terms of reminders, and something simple like that is communication. That's pretty much what it is. So participation rates is a big one. The other one is health data and health outcomes. So depending on what the issue is, so we do normally what is called an employee's needs test or a health risk assessment. We do a questionnaire. If that's the company, we provide the questions and the company does a questionnaire to its team. We see where their little pains are and where they're doing really good, and then build the program based on that. Then obviously satisfaction measures, how happy are the team with the services, you know, how the practitioners, how knowledgeable they are. So that's another form of measure. Obviously what the leaders think, what are the return on investment for them, what are the numbers that we present. For example, what the workers' comp is a big one that we talk about, workers' compensation, sick days, you know, stress leave, anything that is that they've got, the HR have the data or the leaders have the data, we work on that to be able to compare. Now, it's a little bit controversial because, you know, we all talk about ROI. ROI doesn't happen overnight, because sometimes we're working on a workplace culture that has never had a wellness program, doesn't have all these other factors that we're talking about, letting people choose where they want to sit, you know, being supportive, being understanding of work-life balance, all these things that we have to really build upon until then we come in. So it really takes a good year to up to 3 years, depending on the company, to be able to really see a real shift on health of the individual. You might see immediate change, for example, in challenges. So we've seen, you know, people, you know, drop 10% body fat and so forth, but I'm talking about sustainable difference for the company. So there's some of the measures that we take, yeah.
Do you ever find resistance from participants in the program? And if so, why?
Absolutely, and that's all to do with workplace culture. Has nothing to do with us. They are skeptical. They want to know why we're coming in. Why is it that the employer wants to know about their health? And as soon as we see that, we know that we have to work backwards. We have to talk to the leaders. We have to talk to HR. We have to talk about what other fun things that we can do with the staff before we start testing them, before we start collecting data. It's really important. That's a good sign for us to say, hang on, something's not right here in the workplace itself, and the team itself. So identifying, that's a great question. Identifying that first is really important.
Anyone got any other questions?
I was interested in what you're saying about circadian lighting. I was just wondering, I've been through quite a few things with lighting, impacting function testing, and all the rest of LED. Are there any other sort of findings about the frequency of light or the dark lighting that as well?
Certainly, I mentioned colour temperature already, but certainly in terms of, I think there's a very strong body of research around flicker at the moment. So managing flicker from all types of lighting, but especially LED lighting. I think that's something that there is a significant amount of research going into. I mean, the whole idea of circadian lighting is a focus on equivalent melanopic lux, which is really, the way, the amount of bright light that we get that's hitting our eye during the workday. But I mean, that's more in relation to circadian lighting as well. The lighting concept of the Well Building Standard is pretty detailed, but it's really focusing on colour temperature and managing flicker and that kind of circadian lighting design as well.
And if I can add to this, I know less technical, of course. Don't go home and then look at your mobile phone or laptop before you go to sleep. Otherwise, it'll ruin everything. So at least, I would say an hour, but recommended. They say half an hour, but at least an hour. You shouldn't look to on your phone or laptop before sleeping.
The other thing that I keep kind of hitting this point, but in relation to lighting, it's also around occupant control as well. So if you want supplemental lighting to do a task, you should be able to get that supplemental lighting. So to be able to get a task light can be really tricky in some of our modern offices. It shouldn't be. If you cannot perform a task because you don't have adequate lighting, that's a problem. So that's another thing that the Well Building Standard actually provides incentives through points to provide supplemental lighting. Unfortunately, I think that we've obviously had a huge energy debate in this country over the last 10 years. Things like supplemental lighting, to some degree, have been, it's a consequence of the energy debate that we're having. So we want to save energy, so we're going to take away all of the task lighting. But think about the loss of productivity that an individual might face. We're talking 10 to 100 times the cost of energy that is the result of productivity losses. So.
And I might add, the task lighting doesn't always have to be on, so it's not always using energy. Any other questions?
From what I see, so many of the companies that are coming to get their WELL certification, I think they seem to be firstly attracted by all the design aspect of it. How are you seeing a shift in them prioritising the HR, the culture, that component of the policy changing, the people component?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The uptake in WELL, particularly in Australia, has been led by the big developers. It's only within the last 12 months that's changed. So corporate occupiers are getting involved. And it's not typically this has come out of the sustainability movement. So it's ESD consultants that have thought, well, we're doing Green Star. Green Star is like normal. It's commonplace. What's next? And they kind of picked up on WELL. In the last 12 months, it's been quite dramatic, but it's actually been HR managers that have been coming to WELL. And they're saying, well, we've heard about all this research in terms of increased occupant satisfaction from WELL spaces, increased employee performance, increased productivity. What's it all about? So we're actually seeing a shift from design and even operations in terms of facility managers to HR managers actually, leading the conversation. The financial argument around healthy buildings features is something that is really strong. So there are a number of reports that have been released over the last couple of years. There was a very significant report from the World Green Building Council at the start of last year. And then at the end of last year, there was a report by an organisation called Stock. And it was called the Financial Case of High-Performing Buildings. And what they found is that for high-performing buildings that have healthy building qualities, the return was $5,000 US per employee per year. And that would continue on and on and on because of the attraction and retention argument as well. HR managers understand that. The quest to get talent, to retain talent, is really competitive at the moment. One of the reasons why we see such significant uptake in China and in Japan at the moment is because of the attraction and retention of talent. For them, a university graduate is making a choice between organisation X and organisation Y. One has demonstrable credentials in terms of healthy buildings and a healthy workplace. The other doesn't. The emerging workforce places a huge amount of value in these things. And that's why the HR managers are getting more involved in the conversation. It's no longer architects, it's no longer engineers. I mean, they'll always be there, but where the growth of WELL is from the HR side. It's not from the design side.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So I do a lot of work with industrial occupiers, and I go to see a lot of clients that are in large offices with a warehouse behind, and they just seem to be light years behind CBD occupiers. So what you're talking about seems to me to be related to people that are in CBD offices far more than... So I'm just wondering, what are we going to do about these hundreds of thousands of employees that are sitting in soulless industrial estates with no amenity, poor lighting, all the rest of it? How are we going to get that as a priority? Right.
I'll go one better. What about our schools? So we have schools in New South Wales and Victoria that have carbon dioxide levels that are above the recommended limits for a healthy adult, and they're equivalent to having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.15 in our schools. This is the thing that doesn't really sit very well for me, once again, pardon the pun, is that typically this movement has been large commercial offices and spaces that are generally dominated by middle-aged white men in suits and ties. And well has had an early perception as being healthy for the wealthy. Most of us come from very strong public health backgrounds, and that does not sit well with any of us. So we need to shift the conversation. It's okay that the large property developers are leading that, but we need to do more work in industrial assets. We need to do more work in social housing. We need to do more work in schools. And that's why I'm really encouraged that over the last 6 months, a huge amount of the uptake is buildings other than commercial office. Prologis, who are a large multinational industrial asset owner, are doing a lot of work with the Well Building Standard at the moment, because they recognise that unfortunately the people that are most at threat from public health issues are our most vulnerable. And we need to get that balance right. So we're doing a lot of work in social housing as well, because that's really important as well.
If I can touch base about that in terms of corporate wellness programs, some companies have they call it a blue collar and a white collar sector, and it's very important that you if that's one of your companies, that you have different programs for each one. It's a different language, speaking a different language. But now we know that safety and actually wellness is tied in together. We know that a workplace culture that has wellness programs, cares for their staff, have a higher safety rate. So they have less accidents, they have less mortality, because if a ladder's up there and it's dangerous and you care for the company, you will say, hey mate, be careful there, because that's not the right way to do it. Compared to if you know that your company's not caring for you, it's not providing any services, is not providing some good lunch once in a while, and is not providing any services to enhance your health and well-being, you will look the other way. So that has been proven. So it's very important to speak their language, make sure that we educate companies. They do have a blue-collar sector or industrial sector as you're looking after, that we speak their language and create programs that make sense to them. So making sure we create bespoke programs for each sector of the company is important.
Oh.
Yeah, I love this. Question I have is, I suppose, through your programs, a lot of it is the blend of intangible and tangible, putting them together. I'd love to know, is there any ways that you're working on, or have you got any ways that we can put those two together to really make some positive change in the workplace?
Yeah, so the Well Building Standard is a mix of what some people would call tangible and intangible. But I think even what we previously thought of as intangible is now becoming tangible. So once again, I'll use this office as an example. It's only my second time here, and I haven't been primed for any of this. But you look at the plants, right? Biophilia. So biophilia is our innate connection with nature. So we want to be connected with nature. Is that intangible? Some would argue yes. I would probably argue no. Because we're actually seeing through a whole heap of studies that there's a link between providing biophilia or providing nature within our spaces and occupant performance and productivity. So even, once again, I went to the bathroom before. I don't know if anybody's been to the bathroom here. But nature sounds, something very simple. So it doesn't need to be a physical plant, but it's nature sounds. These are aspects. We want to be connected to nature. We want to be connected to nature during the day. These are things that would previously be described as intangible, but I would argue are becoming tangible. The Well Building Standard captures both. So it captures things like lighting levels, but it also captures around how you're creating beauty and design. That's probably a little bit more intangible. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. You've dedicated a considerable time out of your day to come and hear what we have to say. I'm going to hand over to Joel. I believe there's a lucky draw to be done. Do you want to pick a...
Well, I was just going to say is that anyone that's missed putting their business card in before we do pull it out. So, Annalie, it's on you. So this is for the Axiom Thrive Pack, which will certainly help with your wellness program, and also a restaurant voucher which may allow you to break some rules.
Recognise the logo? Nicola Martin. Thank you very much for coming along, and if any of you have any thoughts or questions afterwards, we're an email away and we can connect you with whomever if you want a question answered. Please have a discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
If anyone would like a walk around of the office, we're very happy to, a few of us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much. Actually, whilst I've got you, I think I've run out of cards actually.
Yeah, I'll get my card.
I'd really like to put some thought leadership stuff out to my clients and maybe give you a plug at the same time. So I'd run it by you first, but